Hey, how's everyone doing? Still awake? I'm Ayo. Yes, and I'm going to talk about Astro. I don't have a lot of time. We have quite a number of exciting stuff going on with Astro, so let's dive right into it. I'd like to start with this picture. It says a lot. First, that's Fred. He is the creator of Astro. But also, one thing you need to know about Astro, when people say Astro, they mean one thing. Well, it's the framework, the technology. That's what we're going to talk about right now. But it's also a company. They raised funds so that they can basically hire their maintainers full-time. So there's no separate company behind Astro. It's Astro as technology and Astro as the company. And Fred created the technology, and he is also the CEO of that company. And I also chose this picture. He's not relevant, but you might know him. He's a YouTube influencer. He's also a Twitch streamer. He decided to interview Fred. And when he took a screenshot of his Twitter, I was there. So I thought, well, that's a good bridge, because I also have to introduce myself. Well, I'm Ayo, a consultant with Ayo, the company. Right? Ayo the consultant and Ayo the? Thank you, great crowd. Well, as I think someone mentioned earlier, that's Dave. He mentioned that I also have some open source work. That's true. I'm quite new to open source, but I'm part of the organization behind ELK. But that's using another framework. That's using Nuxt 3, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to briefly mention a library that I released, which has some contributors, and we have a couple of packages released as well. This is for Astro. I see this as an exploration of what we can do with Astro, the framework, not the company. But yeah, I'm not going to talk about that. That's for another talk. We're going to talk about Astro. And I think for us to fully appreciate this new generation kind of frameworks, we need to somehow have a quick look back. So I'm going to take you a short walk down memory lane. Let's see what the previous frameworks did. Why do we need these new frameworks? Of course, I'm going to show some Astro features. Then at the end, my hope is that, well, you have a familiarity with the framework, and you go home with your friends, with your boss, and you could say, we could use Astro for that. That's a use case for Astro. Hopefully you don't get fired, though. But yeah, what gave birth to Astro? Let's look back. Dave also mentioned we used to do a lot on the server. And if you were there maybe around 10 years ago, that's a nightmare. That's a nightmare to maintain, and that's why I chose this one. That's a guy who's trying to upgrade servers manually because there's a spike in the traffic and everyone is experiencing this delay or whatever. Because all the business logic lives in the server, and all the users will basically feel if there's a spike in the traffic. And I still remember the first time that a friend of mine told me, why don't we do all the logic on the browser? And to me, at that point, maybe around a decade ago, that sounds crazy, because JavaScript, no one took it seriously at that time. We did not have, it's not ready at that time. And basically, that's why we need frameworks, all right? So fast forward now, we have frameworks. We can build enterprise-grade software with just JavaScript all on the browser. It's great. But let's take a while to consider. This is a bundle of application that I built with Angular. It does nothing. It's the first application that you will have when you run their CLI, and basically does nothing. But I would ignore everything. Just notice the kind of files right there. I want you to see that there's more JavaScript than any other kind of files. And that's pretty much the same for JavaScript frameworks, pretty much. So there's a single HTML, there's a single div, the root div, and JavaScript will have to figure out what to build around. JavaScript has to figure out what needs to change when something changed. And then we have this kind of bundle right there. Just to really hit the nail, this is a visualization of what a typical web app would look like. And because that's just a single div, single HTML, and JavaScript has to do everything, it has to check a lot of things to know which part will change after a state change or whatever. It doesn't know which parts are static, which parts are interactive, which parts need reactivity. It has to do a lot of checks. And that concept, well, it brought us a lot of problems at this point. So I just list this here. I'm not going to deep dive in everything. You're going to hear more about that later. So we're going to have SolidJS. That's probably going to talk a lot about reactivity. We're going to have Qwik. Going to mention hydration. And I guess at this point, I just want us to be on the same page. We have reached this point where the bundle size does not make sense, because JavaScript created for us problems, and to solve that, we use JavaScript, and then, well, JavaScript. Then there's a lot of research for each point online. You can look it up. I just inserted the last point there, because choosing a framework became such a huge decision for organizations, right? So if you choose Vue, you choose Angular, you choose React, you can only write the components for those frameworks. And there's kind of this idea of framework lock-in well, it's a problem. Now, we can talk about Astro. I have to wake you up, guys. Well, Astro came, and the general feel around Astro is that it's a framework friend. And I'm hoping to convey that to you tonight. Well, let's start with a very important concept in Astro, which is called islands architecture. Islands architecture gives the developer the ability to define which parts are static and which parts need interactivity. So islands here refer to the islands of interactivity, basically in between an ocean of static content. Yeah, that's islands architecture. And with Astro, you can actually write those interactive islands with any framework that you are familiar with. That's kind of how it became the framework friend. You can bring your framework components and use it in an Astro application. But this example is actually an extreme one. There's no application unless you're crazy. You're not going to write an application with this many framework components. I just want to show it because it's possible, and I think someone actually did it. I might do that someday. But yeah, this one makes more sense, because in here, there are static content, and you know that your footer will never need JavaScript. It's just basically text, whatever. You have an image carousel that might need some JavaScript if the user sees it, and that's the idea of islands architecture. The developer needs to be in control which parts need JavaScript and basically when to load that JavaScript, and I'm going to show that later. However, before we go to me showing that, I'd also like to mention a couple of important things. Astro has 100+ integrations right now, and it's growing. You can just go to their website, astro.build/integrations. You can browse around that. If you're curious if what you need is supported, it's there. It's great. Another important thing about Astro is the developer experience. I've been showing this guy a lot. He's Houston. And well, you're going to see him a lot when you use Astro. He's helping you. They have an experimental AI. You can chat with him if you're too tired to read the docs. I'm not like that, but maybe you are. No, I actually asked Houston when I prepared for this. But it's experimental. They have really great docs. I think it's one of the best documentation teams out there, in my opinion. Also, you can strictly type your content. That's quite new to me. I don't know if there's any other thing that does that. You can say what properties are required in your markdown files. So if you have contributors and they don't follow the required properties, they'll get errors. You will get errors. That's cool. So let's see how to create an app with Astro. It's simple. You just run npm create Astro latest, and that's when you will meet Houston. He will go through some questions with you. You can set the name of the project, like so. I'll pretend I'm typing. But you can select templates. I usually select empty when I just need to test something real quick, but if it's your first time, it's recommended you choose the sample files. I choose no here, but you should install the dependencies. It will just take time. You can choose to use TypeScript and how strict it is, and it will initialize a Git repository for you. That's it. You now have an Astro application, and the code structure will look familiar if you've ever used anything that has file-based routing. It has a special directory for pages that will be how your routes are created. And well, the Astro file is the first file you will work with. Of course, Houston is there. Just a cute guy as you code. He's not just something fancy there. He's actually reacting when you code. So when your code is working, he's happy. When you have errors, he's going to be sad. It's fun to work with. I cannot think of any better developer experience than that, having someone cute. Right there. Anyway, let's go. How do you add an integration? They also have a CLI. You can just run Astro add. It will show you the options that you have. There's a lot. If you don't find anything you need, well, you can always go to their website, check their integrations page. But for now, we are interested in adding React, so we run Astro add React. It's going to install dependencies for us. Continue. It's going to download that. It should be quick when it's just an integration. And then it's going to update the configuration for you. You don't have to write that yourself. Well, that's a lot for you. So now, I'd like to show a quick code. The thing that we generated, it's this. I added one here just to show quickly what an Astro file looks like. There's just two basic parts. The one in between the bars, which is your script. It runs on the server. And then that template. It tells Astro how you want the view to be rendered. Now, we're interested to see how we can use React with this basic Astro application. So I'd also like to point out, maybe it's too small, but trust me, there's not a lot of JS in there. This is just a static site right now. There's no interaction. There are some JS there, like for the local development hot module reload, but that's not going to make it in your build file. Now, let's add a React component. So for this demo, I'll just use a counter example. And I cheated a bit because I already wrote it. I'm not going to write that for you. Right there. So I just want to show that you can also copy-paste. That's an important concept here. You have existing, believe me, you have existing components, you can copy-paste it. It will work. Now, we have a React component there. Let's insert it, maybe at the footer. Yes, let's add a footer. Hopefully I can spell. And then, using the component is just, well, as you would expect. Just type it, press enter. It's there. It's going to be imported in your front matter. There's a lot you can do in that front matter, actually. And then I save this. You'll see the counter there. But I want you to notice there's no JavaScript yet. And it's Is it working? No, it's not. And that's by design, because Astro will not load any JavaScript unless you say so. And the way you tell it to load JavaScript is by something called client directives. So you can tell it to download the JavaScript when the page loads. Save that. And there you go. You have counter TSX, you have React. It's going to download it as the page loads. And it's working. I'm going to make it more interesting. And I'm going to push the footer out of our view. Margin top 1000 px. So we cannot see it. And this makes sense because the user cannot interact with something that they cannot see. So if I tell Astro to only load the JavaScript when it is visible, you don't see any JavaScript for that component. And if I scroll down ever so slowly, building the suspense, there's your JavaScript, and it's interactive. That makes sense, right? Now, that's partial hydration, that's progressive enhancement, that's Islands architecture, that's Astro. Their thing, everything you want to know, it's online. It's in their GitHub. They have public roadmap right there. But I'd like to give you a feel of what other framework creators are thinking about Astro. That's Ryan Carniato. He's the creator behind SolidJS. That's Tanner Linsley. He's also trying to build another framework. Maybe we'll have a meetup about that when they do. But they're looking into building on top of Astro. So people are actually recognizing the innovation behind this approach of pre-rendering on the server, having the control when and where to load JavaScript. That's the important thing about Astro. We have some downsides, though. If you compare it with other SSGs, like static site generators, the build time for Astro is quite upsetting. If you compare it to something like just a static site builder like Jekyll, it takes some time. But we know that it's more than a static site generator, so that makes sense. False familiarity, I added that there because if a framework tells you you can write framework components that you already know, but it's actually not running in that framework, you're bound to hit some walls. But the good thing is that there's a great community out there that's already familiar with this, and you can probably find someone who already know how that works. Performance competition. Well, the idea here is that performance will be different for everyone, for your use case. And Astro is not exempt from that. So you have to figure out what kind of performance benchmarks you would like to have. They also like to get into that kind of marketing. So just figure it out. So what is Astro for? It's for content-rich websites. It's for building fast static sites with interactive islands. It's for progressive enhancement with your favorite frameworks. Thank you, and these are my sources.